Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14. Today, we are kicking off season number 4 of the series with the first 3 weeks of the regular season. We had our season preview in the last episode, going over all the top teams, players, and storylines around the country. So in case you missed that episode, I'll leave a card at the top right of your screen so you can go ahead and check it out. For those who need a refresher of what the top 25 looks like, here it is. You got 3 SEC teams at the top. The defending champion Ohio State Buckeyes are number 7, and they are the 3rd projected team within their own conference, which is crazy to me, considering they brought back 90% of their team from last season. These early in-conference races should be exciting to watch. There's going to be many in-conference SEC games right out the gate within the first couple of weeks of the year. Clemson plays against Oregon in Week 2, the ACC and Big Ten frontrunners. You've got teams like Baylor and Cal, who won their conferences last year, looking to get back at it again. The new-look Sun Belt, which we are now referring to as the Fun Belt, has completely transformed itself, and we'll see which other Group 5 darlings could possibly make a run for the college football playoff, especially with Middle Tennessee State, who has made it as the Group 5 representative over the last 2 years, now in the ACC. Our Heisman watch looks like this. We've got the Ohio State backfield at 1 and 2 with Puma Whitlock and Mookie Davis, followed by Jones, Brown, and Chapman. The Week 1 slate of games is not a large slate, but there are some good matchups, again, particularly within the SEC. That conference is getting right down to business to start the year. Here's a look at the Week 2 slate. We've got some really fun games, most notably Ohio State and Oklahoma, a rematch of last year's national championship game. And then during the night slate, we've got Oregon and Clemson, 2 top 5 teams squaring up. And then Week 3 should be really interesting as well. And we're going to cover all of it here today. So buckle in your seatbelts, get your popcorn, because we've got a big episode on tap starting right now with Week 1. A lot of SEC games. We've got a big matchup in the Sun Belt. Penn State faces off against UCLA. A lot of fun stuff. So we're going to start with our season opener between Oklahoma, the reigning national champion runners-up, and the LSU Tigers, who are on their 3rd head coach in the last 4 years. Something's got to give for LSU, and they've got their hands full today. Oklahoma's new starting quarterback, Deacon Adderley, really performed well in his first collegiate start. Despite the rain, Oklahoma's offense had no problem scoring points, as they would end up beating LSU 45-27. It was good to see LSU's offense perform well with Otto Askew now as the full-time starting quarterback, and he performed quite well, but they just could not keep up with Oklahoma. The Sooners obviously lost quarterback Romeo Coloci, who was a top 5 pick in this year's draft. But if Deacon Adderley can keep playing like this, then they're not going to miss a bill on offense. The number 3 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide head to Kentucky to face off against the Wildcats. Again, pretty bad weather. Common theme here in Week 1. It was super rainy. So Alabama's returning their starting quarterback from last year, Troy Davenport. He had some good moments and some bad moments a season ago in his first full season as the starter. But in this game, he was really impressive, dotting up the Kentucky defense. He looks massively improved as a passer from last year to this year as Alabama wins 41-28. Levine Adamson played well for Kentucky, too. He threw for 4 touchdowns, but they could not stop Troy Davenport. 21 for 26. We saw the big-time throws with him, and he was accurate, and that's been a big issue with him. He was good on the ground as well. Alabama's always been a run-first team throughout this series, but they lost both of their big-time running backs last year, and it seems like they're going to really lean in on Davenport. Let's get some Fun Belt action as South Carolina faces off against Texas A&M. Both teams projected to do very well this year, particularly South Carolina, both moving in from the SEC. And this ended up being a really exciting ball game. Both teams ran the ball quite well. For Texas, Keyshawn Porter, their sophomore quarterback, he had some big plays, but he also turned the ball over 3 times, and that was really a killer for Texas A&M. This late touchdown run by Flash Hall would put South Carolina over the edge as they get the win 34-31. South Carolina is the favorite to win the first ever season in the Fun Belt, and this is a good start. Keyshawn Porter had his lumps. He scored 4 all-purpose touchdowns, but 3 interceptions were definitely not ideal. As for South Carolina, Malachi Evans only completed 37% of his passes, but the Gamecocks really ran the ball well, and if Evans can be more efficient as a passer over these coming weeks, then this team can be really dangerous. Number 23, Penn State, kicks off their season here at home against UCLA. With UCLA coming into the Big Ten, a lot of people wondered how they'd compete in the Northeast and Midwest weather. Well, in August, that's not really an issue, and UCLA took full advantage of that here today. Their offense really produced. Quarterback Jayshon Tatum could be a sleeper in this year's NFL draft, and he had a phenomenal game here connecting with multiple touchdowns with his tight end Johnson Johnstone as UCLA gets the first upset of the season, 38-31 in Happy Valley against the Nittany Lions. Maxwell Armistice in his first start as a Penn State quarterback threw for 3 touchdowns, but Jayshon Tatum one-upped him with 4. Tatum is a senior and a guy who could be a diamond in the rough at the quarterback position in this year's draft. Last year's John Mackey Award winner, Johnson Johnstone, picked up right where he left off, catching 8 passes for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. Number 9, Texas, heads to the swamp to take on number 2, Florida. The Gators were the best team in college football for much of the season last year, but they could not get the job done, losing in the college football semifinals. Texas's offense gave the good fight. Onyx St. James, the junior quarterback, had some really good throws in this game, but the big story was Florida's quarterback, Deontay Harris. He's been the backup for the last couple of years to Ernie Capellar, who now is in the NFL. And Deontay Harris, in his first start as a Gator, looked awesome. He threw for 5 touchdowns, leading Florida to a top 10 victory here over the Texas Longhorns, 42-30. Maybe Florida should have started Harris over Ernie Capellar all along. Capellar was a solid quarterback with the Gators, but he never got the job done in big-time situations. So we'll see if Deontay Harris will learn from Ernie Capellar's mistakes and really play well. Rudy Burns was the leading rusher today over Richie Rhodes, who many people would have assumed would have been the main running back. Onyx St. James only completed 46% of his passes, but he also threw 4 touchdowns, but it's not going to be enough to get the win. The final game we'll cover this week is number 1 Georgia, starting the season as the preseason number 1 team, facing off against Arkansas. UGA lost in the semifinals last year to Ohio State. Of course, they have a new quarterback as well, Rufus Motley, the graduate transfer from Cal. Motley made some good plays today, and his chemistry with true freshman wide receiver Vontae Addison was very impressive. Motley also showed his great ability on the ground. He's a phenomenal runner at the quarterback position. You got to give Arkansas some credit, though. They really made this a game. Their running back, Jade Sky, scored 3 touchdowns as he looks to be the next great Razorback running back. But Georgia would ultimately get the win, 28-23. Florida will jump Georgia in the poll, however, so the Bulldogs will fall to number 2. There was some good and some bad with Rufus Motley. It certainly wasn't perfect, but he did make some good plays. And then Vontae Addison, the true freshman, wow, was he impressive. They've got to get the ball into their other receivers' hands, but Addison looks like the real deal. Arkansas did some switching around at the quarterback position, but the real story for them was Jade Sky, 168 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is a run-first team through and through, and they certainly showed it today in a competitive loss against Georgia. Here's a look at the other scores around the country. Utah beats Utah State. Temple surprisingly beats Louisville. SMU scores 52 against Kansas State. Colorado beats Colorado State. And then Wisconsin beats Tulane. So again, a very small slate of games, but we did have plenty of action here in week 1. And we do have some movement at the top of the poll with Florida and their big win over Texas. They jumped the Georgia Bulldogs. There's no other movement in the top 8, but with Texas losing, some teams naturally will move up a little bit as Texas falls to number 15. And then other than that, South Carolina jumps up a little bit, and obviously Penn State drops out with Auburn now in the top 25. Troy Davenport makes his way onto the Heisman watch as he is now in 5th place. He would end up winning the Offensive Player of the Week for the entire country, with UCLA sophomore defensive tackle George Martinez winning the Defensive Player of the Week in their nice win over Kentucky. So now that brings us to week 2. Most teams are opening up their season this week, and this slate of games is really exciting. South Alabama, Middle Tennessee State. Those 2 teams have been attached by the hip throughout this series, and that'll be a really fun matchup with both teams now in new conferences. Obviously, Ohio State and Oklahoma is the game that everybody has circled here. A national championship rematch from a year ago. And then if you look at the late slate, Oregon and Clemson both in the top 5. That is going to be a battle. So let's not waste any time and get started with South Alabama and Middle Tennessee State. Both of these teams have been in the American Athletic Conference for the last 2 years, and before that, they both made the college football playoff in season 1. Now, South Alabama is in the Fun Belt, and Middle Tennessee State is in the Power 5 ACC. Both teams have new quarterbacks. For Middle Tennessee State, it's sophomore Juan Escala Salazar, who had some growing pains, but he still played well enough for Middle Tennessee State to get the win, 42-25. Escala Salazar threw for 291 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Jonathan Terry was the real star of the show on the ground. As for South Alabama, Chris Gruber really struggled in his first start. Certainly did not play as well as Kujay Reddings did last year, their previous starting quarterback. Number 3, Alabama returns home to Tuscaloosa to face off against the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. One of the big stories of week 1 was the strong performance of quarterback Troy Davenport, and he picked up right where he left off in week 2. He might have been even better as a passer today. Now, Wake Forest made this a game. You got to give the Deacons some credit, but Alabama was able to get the win 49-35. And man, I know it's early, but Troy Davenport looks really good. The Crimson Tide would drop down to number 4, however, despite their win. Davenport threw for 452 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also was picked off twice and wasn't as accurate today, but still really, really good. And he was also dominant on the ground. It doesn't seem like Alabama really trusts these young running backs, and they're really relying on Davenport to carry the offense. Sean Selvey threw for 4 touchdowns as well, but that's not going to be enough for Wake Forest to get the job done. All right, here we go. The game everybody's been waiting for. Ohio State and Oklahoma battle it out in Norman. These two teams faced off against each other last year in the national championship game. Ohio State obviously ended up winning. Ohio State's bringing back basically their entire team from last year, whereas Oklahoma looks very different on both sides of the ball. However, Herbstreit is rocking with the Sooners, so it'll be interesting to see if he ends up being right. Through the first quarter, his prediction aged like a fine wine because Oklahoma dominated. This looked like a team who was out for revenge, and boy, were they impressive in the first quarter. Deacon Adderley threw for 3 touchdowns in the first, and Oklahoma led at 21-0. Ohio State had looked flat. They looked like they did not belong out there, but I will say the Buckeyes certainly played a lot better after the first quarter. Puma Whitlock, the Heisman favorite at quarterback, woke up and played really well over the last 3 quarters to put Ohio State back into the ball game. And this ended up being very competitive in the second half, especially with Puma Whitlock making plays like this in the pocket. There's a reason why he's the Heisman Trophy favorite. But Oklahoma's big lead in the first quarter was enough of a cushion for them to feel confident throughout the fourth quarter to hold on, and that they did. The Sooners win it 34-29. Not exactly revenge for losing a national championship, but this helps. Deacon Adderley was very solid in this game. He's not as good as Romeo Coloci was, but through 2 games, he's looked pretty solid, and this Oklahoma team looks like they could be a contender. As for Ohio State, I really wouldn't worry. Puma Whitlock played well. They'll be fine. I'm still very confident this team can be a favorite in the playoff, but they just won't be undefeated. Next up, we've got Duke, number 20, facing off against FCS East. Last year, Duke had arguably the best offense in the country, but their defense was really bad. There was no consistency from both sides of the ball. Now, luckily, today there was a lot of consistency from the offense and defense, and it's that they both played equally garbage. FCS East not only won this game, but they dominated. They beat Duke on their home turf 30-0. Duke, the number 1 scoring offense across college football last year, did not score a single point. Jack Gallagher, in his first career start as the Duke quarterback, ended up playing horribly, and he ended up getting benched. The backup quarterback was even worse. The 2 QBs went 12 for 40 for 100 yards and 3 interceptions. Man, I bet they miss Justin Tucker, the Heisman Trophy winner, right about now because the offense was horrible and the defense was just as bad as it was a season ago. It looks like it could be a rough season in Durham for the Blue Devils. Speaking of FCS opponents, FCS Southwest is going to travel to Beaver Stadium here to face off against the Penn State Nittany Lions. Unlike the Duke game, at least Penn State kept it close. However, coming off a loss last week, he would have liked to have seen them play better, and FCS Southwest really made this a ball game. Penn State had a late drive to tie the game up, bringing it into overtime, and the game actually made it all the way to 4 overtimes. This ended up being a thriller, but a game-winning field goal by FCS Southwest would give them the upset over the Penn State Nittany Lions, who start the season off 0-2. They lose an early in-conference game at home, and then this happens. It might be a rough year for Penn State, who already is failing expectations in a major way. The Syracuse Orange have a new era. They have acquired former LSU quarterback Thomas Torominko out of the transfer portal as he faces off against the number 16 ranked Tennessee Volunteers here at the Carrier Dome. Torominko's day really did not go to plan because within a minute of the game, he ended up getting hurt. Not going to be a long-term thing, but he'll be out for the rest of the game. Former 5-star quarterback Chandler Silvers came in, and things went quite badly in Silvers' collegiate debut. He was picked off twice On the other side of the ball, the senior quarterback, Roddy Jolly, a player I'm very high on going into the season, looked quite impressive, completing 26 of his 37 passes for 2 touchdowns. He wasn't perfect. He did throw an interception, but overall he looked really solid, and I think this could be the year that Tennessee surprises some people in the SEC East as they win this game in dominant fashion, 38-15. Really not a great performance here from Chandler Silvers, and he was the #1 quarterback in his class just a couple of years ago, so it says something that Syracuse got a guy out of the portal. And when Silvers got the opportunity to play, he was not good. I think had Silvers performed well, he would have had an opportunity to stay as the quarterback over Toromenko, but obviously that is not going to happen. Idaho, after their big 12-win season last year, is now in the Pac-12, and they start things off tough, facing off against the 24th-ranked Stanford Cardinal, who project to be the second-best team in the conference, only behind Cal. The reason why Iowa was so good last year was their offense. However, they lost their quarterback in the offseason, and their new quarterback, Kylan Cortland, well, he looked even better than the guy they had last year. Cortland ended up throwing for 6 touchdowns, and Idaho would win in a shootout, 52-41. I think Idaho's going to be legitimately good this year. I think they're going to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12. Their offense is so talented. I'm not too worried about Stanford offensively. Their running back, Rudolph Moore, was good, but their defense could not keep up with Kylan Cortland and all these dynamic skill position players. Colin Robinson, the junior, leading the way with 2 touchdowns. And finally, #5 Oregon faces off against #4 Clemson in what ended up being a really, really good matchup. This game was as good as we could have expected. So, of course, Oregon has a new quarterback, redshirt freshman Stanley Cubbage Jr., making his collegiate debut, and there were some flashes, we'll put it that way. Cubbage scored twice, and we saw the high upside he has, but he also threw 4 interceptions. He could not take care of the football, and, well, there were a lot of bad plays with him. However, on the flip side, it was much of the same. Clemson's senior quarterback, Cedric Chapman, had the same high-end plays that he had last year, but he also made the same mistakes that he did last year. A late touchdown by running back Mason Tartle would propel Oregon to the upset, 35-28. Cedric Chapman only completed 45% of his passes. If he wants to be a Heisman candidate or a high NFL draft pick, that can't happen. He's got to be more accurate with the football. That was his issue last year, and that doesn't seem to be addressed this year. As for Oregon, Stanley Cubbage Jr. did not have a great debut, but again, he's only a freshman, and the fact that Oregon still won this game with him turning the ball over 4 times says a lot. Let's take a look at some of the other scores around the country. Notre Dame clobbers BYU. Michigan State and Virginia Tech take care of business. Georgia with another close game, barely beating Ole Miss this time. South Carolina with a good win over Tulsa. Tulsa's really good. Cal wins their first game, unlike last year as they beat Colorado. Florida and USC take care of business. They get nice wins. Texas takes care of business. Auburn wins 49-0. USF and Miami win their first games of the year. Florida State beats West Virginia in a competitive matchup. And then Iowa, North Carolina, and Southern Miss win as expected. As we take a look at some of the other scores now, Mississippi State needs overtime to defeat FCS West. Bowling Green starts their season off strong. Kentucky beats LSU. Minnesota beats Louisville. Michigan starts the year with a win over San Diego State. Houston starts the year with a win. TCU beats FCS West only 17-6. The UCLA fun comes to a screeching halt as they lose to Pitt 42-27. Nebraska loses to FCS Northwest. It might be another rough season in Lincoln. Their playoff run in year 2 appears to be a one-year wonder. Nevada loses to an FCS team. They won the Mountain West last year. And then looking at the bottom, Boston College also loses to an FCS opponent. Iowa State drops 62 on Vanderbilt. Holy smokes. Arizona with a nice win over a talented Buffalo team. Memphis only beats FCS Southwest by 2. So we're going to have plenty of movement in the polls of some big teams losing. Clemson drops all the way down to 10 after their loss against Oregon, who jumps Alabama and moves up to number 3. Other than that, not a whole lot of major changes within the top 10. As for some of the risers and fallers, Ohio State goes down to 13. I feel like they shouldn't have dropped that far. They never should have been number 7 to begin with. They should have been number 1 to start the year. Southern Miss and Michigan State enter the top 25, while Duke and Stanford drop out, and I have a weird feeling we probably won't see Duke back there this year. We do have some movement in the Heisman watch as Troy Davenport makes his way up to number 3, DeAndre Jones drops to 4, and then Rudy Burns, the backup running back for Florida, is now 5th. He's been their lead guy this year, and he's been really good. Players of the week, Troy Davenport again for Alabama, his 2nd in a row. And then on defense, it's Benny Harris for Texas A&M. So that'll bring us into week 3. We've got some really good games here. Iowa and Iowa State both played really well in week 1, so that could be a fun game. Obviously, they're both rivals. Middle Tennessee State and UAB rematch in last year's wild American Athletic Championship game. Clemson plays the other Oregon team. I think Navy-Miami is going to be a really good game, and obviously Oklahoma and Florida as well. Florida's 2 losses last year were against Oklahoma. Michigan State, USC should be a really fun game as well. And then we've got Georgia and Florida State in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. So we've got a lot of really fun matchups here in week 3. We'll start with the rivalry between Iowa and Iowa State. 2 teams who have been pretty disappointing throughout this series so far. Iowa's just been very mediocre, and Iowa State's been really bad. But both of them played really well in their first games. Iowa beat Air Force 38-3, and Iowa State beat Vanderbilt 62-20. This game ended up being really good. Obviously, both of these schools are big-time rivals, and we saw a lot of offense in this one. Iowa's not a team who scores a bazillion points a game, but they had 38 last week, and they had even more this week. Iowa State's offense matched up with them the entire game, and it seems like this new coach and this new group at Iowa State are really starting to build up a good program here at the Cyclones, that they'd be unable to beat their rivals here as Iowa wins a really exciting game by the score of 43-40. Good win for the Hawkeyes. I said at the beginning of the year that they shouldn't have been ranked, and albeit we're only through 3 weeks, but so far they're proving me wrong, especially on offense. They've looked really good. Quadell Owens, the quarterback, has been impressive. He wasn't perfect today, but he did throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Navy and Miami were 2 teams who, for most of the season last year, looked like they were going to make the college football playoff, but Miami choked towards the end of the regular season, and then Navy lost their last 2 games, including getting shut out in the conference championship to push them out of the playoffs. So both of these teams have an extra chip on their shoulder this year, and ultimately it was Miami who got the job done. The Hurricanes would end up winning this game 38-24. The first really good performance in the career of quarterback Luke Burnett, who was the starter at the end of last year and really struggled, but it seems like he has improved throughout the offseason. He only completed 50% of his passes in this game, but he didn't turn the ball over. He had some good throws. He also ran it in for 2 touchdowns as well. As for Navy, the reasons why they did not make the playoffs last year appear to be the same issues this year, and that is that they have no passing game at all. Their passing game is not efficient, it is not explosive, it is just all around bad. Oregon's coming off a huge win last week against the Clemson Tigers, and now they're going to return home here in Eugene to face off against the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky University. I think Oregon might have gotten a little bit excited after their somewhat upset win against Clemson because they came into this game flat. Oregon made a solid push in the second half, but they were just flat the entire way, and Western Kentucky gets the biggest upset of the season, 38-30 over the Oregon Ducks, who drop all the way to number 20. Their big win against Clemson comes at a cost as they lose to the Hilltoppers. Stanley Cubbage Jr., again, not a great performance from him. He seems quite raw through the first couple of games of the year, and again, he's only a freshman. There's no reason to panic, but he does not look the best. Will Faith for Western Kentucky threw for 3 touchdowns. He didn't turn the ball over as the Hilltoppers get the win, and it appears that they could be a team who ends up doing better than expected. Western Kentucky was not good last year, but beating Oregon on the road, that takes some guts. Number 6 Oklahoma faces off against number 1 Florida. The Gators were the best team in college football for most of the season last year. They only lost 1 game in the regular season, and obviously they lost in the playoffs. Both of those losses were to Oklahoma, so we'll see if they can get their revenge on the Sooners, just like Oklahoma did last week against Ohio State. Short answer, no. Didn't happen. Florida's offense was bad. Oklahoma's offense was good. They ran the ball really well, and the Sooners jump up from 6 all the way to number 1 in the poll as they beat Florida 24-13. Deontay Harris definitely was not as good as he was in his first couple of games to start the year. And as for Oklahoma, they are the big darlings through the first 3 weeks. They lost more talent than just about anybody. They lost 3 top 10 picks, including their quarterback and arguably the best defensive player in the country, and they don't look like they've missed a beat. Hell, they look even better than they did last year. Michigan State faces off against number 5 USC here at the Coliseum. Michigan State's a team I'm very high on. I talked about Jay Jordan, how he's going to start the year as the top projected quarterback in this draft class, and I want to see how he can do in a big game. Jordan ended up doing really well. Through the first quarter, he was 7 for 9. He had 2 touchdowns. Michigan State was playing really well, and then he got injured. And then everything after that fell apart for the Spartans. Sophomore quarterback Amari August struggled early in this game, but he played a lot better in the second half. leading USC to a huge comeback win as the Trojans would fight on it to a massive comeback here, beating Michigan State 34-31. I don't know if I should be more optimistic about Michigan State or not. I am still a little bit concerned about USC. Their quarterback, Amari August, appears to be a little bit raw as well, but he played very good in the second half of this game. And as for the Spartans, Jay Jordan, in the one quarter he did play, he looked like the real deal. He was awesome. Then the backup comes in, and he completes 34% of his passes, and Michigan State doesn't look like the same team. But when Jay Jordan's healthy, and I believe he will be back next week, Michigan State can beat anybody in the country, and this is a team who absolutely could be a sleeper for the college football playoff. We've got the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic here at the Georgia Dome. It feels like it should be a Georgia home game, but it's not too far away from Tallahassee as well. I see a lot of red in the stands, but which red? I'm not sure. Should be a fun game with both teams ranked in the top 7. Florida State's been really good in each of the first 3 seasons of the series, but they have not made the college football playoff once because of their inability to win games. This is their opportunity to change the narrative. This game ended up being really competitive and ultimately ended up going into overtime. Georgia got the ball first. They would tack on 3. Florida State's got their shot to win a big game. All they need to do is score a touchdown, and they would do just that. Jayshawn Tate with the game winner for the Seminoles as they defeat Georgia 33-30. Ahmed Okado, the new starting quarterback, played very well for the Seminoles as all 3 of the top 3 teams in the poll lose this week. Rufus Motley really struggled for Georgia. He was good as a runner, but he struggled as a passer. Florida State with a statement win as they climb all the way up to number 3. There was not a large quantity of big games this week, but boy, there was quality with the top 3 teams all losing. Other results include Auburn, Middle Tennessee State, Clemson, and Arizona taking care of business. Notre Dame with a nice win. North Carolina, Alabama, they get nice wins. Pitt, Wisconsin, Baylor, Cal, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, and Texas also in their games as well, along with South Carolina, who beat a really good UTEP team. South Carolina looks awesome through their first 3 games in the Fun Belt. As we take a look at some of the other scores, Duke actually scored points this week, but they still lost to Army, 35-31. Memphis with a nice win. They beat Toledo. Looking down the board a little bit, Tulsa wins their first game of the year. Indiana beats Kansas in a battle of blue blood basketball schools. If that game was on the hardware, Kansas is winning. Washington beats Virginia in a close game. Penn State sucks. They lose to UCF by a lot. Michigan is now 2-0. They get a nice victory. Old Dominion beats Kansas State. The Wildcats are 0-3, while Old Dominion looks pretty solid so far. Oklahoma State beats UConn. Idaho with another win. And then looking at the bottom, South Alabama 0-2 as they lose to Hawaii. South Alabama is only good every other year. So is this year where they're not good? TCU loses to Minnesota. I don't think we'll have another TCU national championship year. Their title run appears to be a one-and-done kind of thing. So we had plenty of movement in the AP poll with the top 3 teams, Florida, Georgia, and Oregon, all losing this week. Oklahoma started the episode number 10, and they climb up all the way to number 1 after big wins against some great teams like Ohio State and Florida. Florida State moves up to number 3 after their nice overtime win against Georgia. Florida drops to 6, Georgia drops to 8, and of course, as we talked about earlier, the Oregon Ducks fall all the way to 20. Miami moves up quite a bit after their win against Navy, who drops to 18. Arizona, Pitt, and Wisconsin are now ranked, while USF, Southern Miss, and Michigan State drop out. Luckily for Michigan State, they're the first team out, so they didn't drop too far. Puma Whitlock is still the Heisman frontrunner, but we've got a lot of movement. Troy Davenport now in 2nd. He is climbing. He passes Mookie Davis, while Tyshawn Bankston is now in 4th. And Rufus Motley, after a bad game throwing the ball, is in 5th, even though he completed less than 50% of his passes and lost last week. Players of the week, Brett Robinson for Texas, and Kentucky quarterback Levine Adamson, who threw for 7 touchdowns against the University of Louisiana Lafayette. So that'll get us through the first 3 weeks of the year. A lot of excitement here early in the season. Let's take a look at weeks 4 through 6. Most of the other conferences are starting their in-conference games. I know the SEC had a lot of in-conference stuff already, but pretty much everybody else is really getting started here. Georgia Tech Navy could be fun. Texas Alabama is going to be a big test for both of those teams. Florida Tennessee, 2 big-time rivals. Florida's coming off a loss, but I do like Tennessee this year. Look out. Pitt Notre Dame, Wisconsin USC, those are both good games. Middle Tennessee State's first in-conference ACC game is going to be a tough battle in Florida State against the Seminoles. Baylor plays Auburn. Arizona plays Idaho. All really good games. And then in week 5, Iowa, Michigan State. Clemson, Middle Tennessee State. Man, the Blue Raiders are really getting an early ACC test. Oregon and USC, there's a good shot the winner of that game wins the Big Ten West. Both schools, of course, with new young quarterbacks. Cal against Arizona, maybe the two best teams in the Pac-12 facing off. South Carolina, South Alabama, two teams projected to do well in the Fun Belt, and then Florida State and North Carolina. In Week 6, South Alabama, Texas is kind of interesting. Iowa gave Ohio State a lot of trouble last year. We'll see if we have a similar result. Tennessee, Georgia should be a good game, as should Oregon and Michigan. Miami, Clemson during the night slate. Kentucky could prove to be a tough test for number 1 Oklahoma. So certainly an exciting start to the season. A lot of surprises. We're going to continue to get more clarity on a lot of these teams and players here through the next few weeks. I hope everybody enjoyed the episode, though. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.